Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of Across the Pitch, where we know that it ain't always about the money. Atlanta United boasts the most expensive attack in the league, worth about $50 million, and yet it's been shut out 9 of its 20 games this season. The MLS salary guide that came out a few weeks ago revealed that one of those attacking players, Miguel Almiron, who has just 3 goals and 3 assists, is getting paid almost $8 million. But Lorenzo Insigne said, hold my limoncello, as he managed just a goal and 3 assists this season on a whopping $15.4 million contract, which was terminated last week, along with that of his countryman, Federico Bernardeschi. And that's the matchup we have this Saturday. Atlanta United visiting Toronto FC for what should be a thrilling contest between 13th and 14th place in the East. And here to help me break down that madness is Mike from the Toronto Till I Die show. Mike, what's going on, man?
Henry, how you doing, man? What times we live in. At one point, you and I might be jumping on a show like this, talking about an Eastern Conference final playoff run. Oh man, have our clubs fallen?
Back in 2019, that would have been the case.
That would have been the case.
Still hurts, man.
lot has changed. A lot has changed.
A lot has changed, but let's talk about that a little bit from the Toronto perspective. It seemed like, y'all won that treble back in, I think it was 2017, and y'all were still a dominant force for a couple of years after that, beating Atlanta in the 2019 Eastern Conference Final and making it to another MLS Cup. But since 2021, it seems like things have kind of gone downhill for Toronto. Why is that the case?
Yeah, look, I think you talk about a run of time, and before I even get into that, you sort of talk about the history of our club and our team. From our inception from 2007 in our first season, all the way up until about 2015, really. The club was a joke in the league. It was great sort of off the field. The vibes at BMO Field were great. People were going to games, but the team was never really good. In the first couple of years, you can kind of excuse that as a expansion franchise, but as the years went on, this sort of incompetence of decision making at in the soccer level for the team was just bad. Really up until the time that Michael Bradley, at the time, Jermaine Defoe joined the club. And even in that first season in 2014, things just didn't go right. They missed the playoffs. But really, when Sebastian Giovinco, Josie Altidore joined Michael Bradley at Toronto FC in 2015, the trajectory was straight up. So you went from a team that won literally almost nothing other than Canadian championships to a team that all of a sudden was in the ascendancy within Major League Soccer. Of course, culminating in 3 finals in 4 years during that period. And then COVID really kind of wrecked the club. There's a couple of things that happened during that time. One of the biggest is that Tim Bezbatchenko, our former GM, ended up taking the presidency role at Columbus Crew. And from there was a lot of sort of executive brain drain from the team. And that impacted the product on the pitch, as sort of the players that were being brought in just weren't to the standard that Greg Vanney wanted. That said, that 2020 sort of Franken season that we had with the MLS's back tournament, and then obviously the truncated season and TFC basically playing 2 teams for like a quarter of that season, almost challenged for a supporter shield, just pipped by a really good Philadelphia Union team. And at the end of that season, Greg Vanney left. And really, that was the sort of death knell for Toronto FC. We didn't know it at the time, but it became sort of the death knell and kind of the slow decline. Well, slow in some ways, but actually quite rapid in others, because that brain trust that built that club and built the identity around Toronto FC, that sort of win at any cost mentality, that sort of group mentality of going in and playing your football and imposing yourself on teams was gone almost instantly. And they have never really gotten it back. They've tried different things. They've tried a plethora of managers, from Chris Armas to Bob Bradley to bringing in a former TFC player and Terry Dunfield as an interim, and now on Robin Fraser. And I think when you think about that, the amount of coaches and you think about the amount of signings the team has had since then, none of it has really gelled. Of course, you talked earlier about Federico Bernardeschi, about a Lorenzo Insigne, and that's really kind of the sort of tip of the iceberg in terms of just some of the problems. But really, that those two sort of, if you look at it as a what went wrong with TFC, look at those two signings and kind of that encapsulates all the sort of poor decision making that's been happening at the club.
You brought up Tim Bezbatchenko and Greg Vanney, two names who have gone on to find success at other clubs. Bezbatchenko with the Columbus Crew, we've seen the machine that they've built, a force that has been dominant over the past several years now within MLS as a whole. Probably one of the best teams that MLS has ever seen, really. And then Greg Vanney, obviously that championship-winning LA Galaxy side that took MLS Cup last year. I mean, those are two big names, and to think that Toronto lost those two, I mean, it feels very significant, and it makes sense given the timeline that you're telling me about.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you had a team there that made decisions in a harmonious fashion. You know, obviously you were backed by three great DPs that turned out to be pretty much club legends at this point. And you know, in Atlanta, you all have sort of a familiar experience with having sort of cornerstone designated players on your team. You really need to nail those signings if you're going to make it and you're going to spend the kind of money that both our clubs spend, right? And in some ways, Atlanta has got it right probably more often than TFC in the last couple of years. But, you know, it's been sort of disaster signing after disaster signing when you think about the DPs and the amount of money that's been spent, not just even on DPs, but even role players coming in and how many players have just come through and different ideals and how to build the team. You feel like you have really a Franken team. And that's kind of what you might be seeing a bit on Saturday. Is this team that, you know, some were signed by Robin Fraser, some were still signed by Bob Bradley, you know, some were signed by Bill Manning, who used to be the president here. You know, so you've got this team that isn't quite Robin Fraser's, and he's trying to piece together players, and there's some players on loan, and there's a lot of academy players. I think you're going to notice in the predicted start of 11. So TFC right now, I think, is going through a seismic sort of look inward on what are we as a club, how are we going to operate in the market going forward, and how are we going to use internal homegrown development to try to supplement the roster, because what they've been trying to do the last almost 5 years just hasn't worked at all.
Lots of different signings from lots of different folks in this Toronto side, but let's talk about their most recent transfers, the stuff they did this season. Let's take a look at some of their incomings, and the one that really stands out to me so far, Teo Corbianu. He seems to be doing some of the right stuff, right? 4 goals and an assist so far this season. He's leading the club's scoring. Tell me more about him and what he brings to the team.
Yeah, for sure, and definitely he's one of those players currently on loan at Toronto FC. He's on loan from Granada in La Liga 2, and look, Theo is a Canadian international. He is a Toronto FC Academy product who left quite early when he got a scholarship at Wolves. So there's been a lot of sort of expectation on Theo to try to, you know, push on. A lot of people here in Canada thought he might be a guy who stayed in Europe and sort of tried to make his name there. And it hasn't quite worked out for him. He hasn't really gotten sort of off the ground in terms of, you know, the expectations, at least, that people had for him. Even when he made his Canada debut during 2022 World Cup qualifying, he scored a couple of goals, looked pretty lively. We're seeing that player sort of start to show himself now at Toronto FC. Now he's gotten more minutes. He's gotten more comfortable being back in Toronto and under Robin Fraser. I think this is a player that still has a lot of growing to do as a player. He can beat players one-on-one. He is fantastic dribbler, very sort of that tricky winger that with a lot of pace. But the biggest criticism that fans have of Theo right now is just his final third decision making. And even just getting into the 18 and making crosses and final product, it's kind of missing in some critical spots. Now, that's not to say and try to take away things he's done. The 4 goals, the assist, that's fantastic return so far. But I think there is more. You can see more is there for Theo, and you're waiting for him to unlock that extra bit of talent that's going to take him to the next level.
Let's flip over to the outgoings. Got to talk about the Italians, man. Lorenzo Insigne and Federico Bernardeschi, both DP contracts that were mutually terminated last week. Mike, when they arrived, it seemed like major stars were coming in to usher Toronto's return to the MLS elite, but they leave under these disappointing circumstances. What went wrong with these two guys?
Well, I think, look, anybody that saw those signings at the time, myself included, could not have predicted that this would end this way. Even with the doubts, and there were doubts, especially around Lorenzo Insigne's signing, and not so much around the talent, but just the amount of money outlaid for him at the time. We knew about the injury history a bit at Napoli. We knew that this was not the guy, from the 3 years previous that had been in Champions League with that, that we knew we weren't getting that guy. What we didn't really anticipate was I dare say, just the utter lack of production, right? And that's the on the field stuff. That's without getting onto all the off the field stuff that apparently happened behind the scenes. The fact that he and Federico and maybe another player or two tried to essentially run a coup on Bob Bradley at the time and try to get him sacked as manager. The sort of lack of effort in some cases from him. Really soured Toronto FC fans very quickly on him. And it's kind of sad because that's, he and Federico Bernardeschi is a little bit of a different case. And I'll talk about that in a second, but just zoning in on Lorenzo, he had a really great opportunity to take this town by storm, right? Another sort of diminutive Italian player coming to a market with a large Italian community that really was there to back him. He just never felt, at least publicly, that he really embraced the club. It really felt like Lorenzo Insigne kind of over here and Toronto FC over here. And you kind of, and I mean, look, the salary disparity, the salary gap between the two. I know some of the players have come out since and said, we don't think about it. It's not a thing that we worry about. There's no way you don't think about that. When the guy isn't producing, there's no way that doesn't come up in conversations, right? So, he leaves under a cloud, a lot of disappointed, upset supporters, about Lorenzo. And then Federico, kind of started off the same way as Lorenzo. Like, a lot of people going into 2024 wanted him gone the same time they wanted Lorenzo gone. But he kind of had a bit of a redemption arc at Toronto FC. John Herdman coming in, playing him at left wing back, or right wing back, excuse me, that surprised a lot of people, obviously, at the start of the season, and him producing the way he did in 2024 and sort of the effort he showed, which, look, effort should be a bare minimum for any footballer on the pitch. But, the effort he showed, got a lot of fans back on his side. I think this year, when you look at it, he wasn't bad. Like, he wasn't terrible or by any means. But for what you're paying him, that kind of level of production is just not going to cut it. And there's no point in keeping him if he's not going to be a part of the future solution of Toronto FC. You might as well just let both of them go and try to start fresh. So I think that's where you're at Toronto FC. And with the two Italian experiment, don't expect Toronto FC to spend money like that in the near future. I think they'll still spend money. I still think they'll sign DPs, but don't expect them to splash out like they did for Lorenzo Insigne again. Like, they're not paying $50 million to a footballer again unless it's messy, right? Unless he decides he wants to come to Toronto FC. That's about it. Outside of that, I think this team is going to look for DPs that are a little bit more under the radar, but still can provide you value, and more importantly, are probably under the age of 30. So that's another thing to keep an eye on.
Obviously, no DP signings that Toronto makes will be involved in this game, but do you think that they signed any DPs in this window?
I don't think so personally. I know some of my colleagues in the podcast world think otherwise. There is a report out there that Toronto FC is going after former Burnley midfielder Josh Brownhill, who scored about 18 goals in the championship last year. Um, I mean, look, they're competing with a lot of different teams for his signature right now. So we'll see. I say they're not going to spend big money. It might take big money to get him here, but maybe not necessarily Lorenzo or Federico Bernardeschi money. Um, but I think TFC, I think, are going to spend the back half of this season understanding what they have right now. And understanding, who out of the academy players can be, real pieces going forward. Out of our loan signings, who do we want to keep and make evaluations on, and who are we going to let go and go back to their parent clubs? And some of the sort of free agent 1-year contracts, so like Toronto FC at the end of the season, I think are only going to have about 8 players under contract. So a lot of guys are kind of fighting for a job right now on that Toronto FC team. So they're going to take this time to evaluate who's going to be part of the future and who's not. So I wouldn't necessarily expect any kind of big splashy signings from TFC this transfer window.
That's interesting because this situation that you described, it's reminds me a lot of Atlanta United's situation where, this season has obviously gone way below expectations for this club, given the investment ahead of the season. You start this season with 2 new DPs. Miguel Almiron, club legend, comes back. You expect him to kind of pick up where he left off, and he just hasn't been that guy.
Yeah.
And Emmanuel Lattelat, record-breaking MLS striker signing. And, he starts off hot and then cools down, and he hasn't scored in about 13 games. And you start to wonder, well, was this guy really worth the money? Was this really the right pick? But then you go and look at the rest of the roster and you're like, man, this isn't great, right? This isn't what this club needs. This isn't a competitive team. And we look at the contract situation, and there's 12 contracts that run out at the end of the season. And we expect quite a few of them to not be renewed, to not be picked up. This is kind of, again, another rebuild for Atlanta United, where they just need
welcome to the club, man. Welcome to the club.
and it's interesting that you mentioned, like, you're kind of looking at the academy, the homegrowns, some of these kids that are coming up and who could potentially be building blocks for your future. Atlanta's kind of doing the same thing. This season, one of the most standout performers, Jay Fortune, midfielder, who, he was doing amazing. He was probably at times the brightest spot on this team for a lot of the games this season because of his effort, because of his skill, because he was just so capable in one-on-one situations. He was so able to just progress the play in a way that no other midfielder on this roster is able to do. Then he goes down and he's injured for the rest of the season.
Yeah.
And it's just brutal.
That's tough.
And so we're okay. Obviously, we need to keep him because he is going to be a building block for this team. Who else? You have a center back in Efrain Morales, who's getting call-ups. He's a consistent starter for the Bolivian national team. He played this past weekend, and he put in a great shift to deny Christian Benteke several times. Great, okay. Noah Cobb, another center back who is promising. We hear highly about him every single day at training. We have Will Riley, who is an academy player who we signed this season to a homegrown contract, and he's been fantastic in midfield. He's probably been our best real number 6 that this team has had, as far as, his ability to, confidently move through midfield and just show these other guys that have more years of experience on him, that he can be competitive in this roster. And just like that, I really relate to that situation. And it's interesting that these two teams that are kind of, this season, it's kind of gone down the drain at this point. So let's just figure out what we have for 2026, right?
Yeah, 100%. And you talk about young players in Atlanta, and Toronto FC is exactly the same, right? Look, I think Toronto FC have wasted one of the most talent-rich areas in North America, sort of the Greater Toronto area. All these national team players that come from Brampton, that come from Toronto, that come from out east like Newmarket and things like that. Half of those guys never played in the Toronto FC Academy, and some of them did, and were literally in and out. And it speaks to it speaks to a time where TFC was buying to win, right? And did it successfully for a while. And a lot of those young players never really got a chance to get into the first team and really show what they could do. And TFC are kind of paying for some of that right now. We spent time talking about Lorenzo, Insigne, Federico, Bernardeschi. I look at some of that outbound list there of players like, Luke Singh was an academy player, never really got an opportunity, was sent on loan a bunch of times and let go. Adam Perlman, Hugo Mbonge, they're both on loan currently right now. One's in the Canadian Premier League, one's in the USL Championship. You have Lazarus Stevanovic there as an in. That's a youth signing. He's only 18 years old, center back. Has trained with this senior national team, plays for the U21s, really, really good, smooth defender on the ball. In the games that he's gotten in, has shown himself capable of playing at this level, needs to get a little bit stronger physically. But that's another player that you can look at. Marcus Zimmermancic, again, another academy player getting an opportunity, got kind of thrust into the fire this season right off the bat, had to start a whole bunch of games, probably wasn't quite ready to start all those games, but showed moments of being able to compete at that level. And you start thinking about some of the players. I know we're going to get into the 11, but there's some young players in there as well that could be a part of Toronto FC's future. One that's not in the 11 that has been for quite a bit of the season is Kosi Thompson. And I wouldn't even really rate him as a young player anymore. He's still young, but this is now his third season in Toronto FC, but this is the first season where he's really getting consistent minutes. And he's been asked to play all over the place, depending on the coach. He started off he came up as a midfielder, more of an attacking midfielder. Then they asked him to be a holding midfielder. Then he had to be a right back. Then he had to play a right wing back. So now this season, he's been primarily playing as a right back, while Richie Larea has been injured and then out with the Canadian national team. And he's shown promise there at defending. And now you kind of figure out, okay, is he a right back? Are you going to keep him as a midfielder? Is he going to be a jack of all trades kind of guy? So there's a lot of young players that Toronto FC have currently in the senior roster, and even young players are playing at Toronto FC too that could potentially make the leap. But again, this is a squad that's got to kind of figure out, what are we going to be going forward? Are we going to continue to go out in the market and be aggressive in free agency and try to sign players on freeze, or are we going to really invest in young players and let Robin Fraser cook that way? And that's the thing we're going to probably learn a lot more about by the end of September into early October.
Two teams that are trying to figure out the way forward clash this Saturday. Let's look at your predicted 11 for Toronto.
Yeah.
Just walk me through it real quick and highlight some key players that we need to look out for.
Yeah, so I put it as a 4-2-3-1, can morph into a 4-3-3. Really the players I want to sort of highlight. One, Richie Larea and Davy Flores. Both are returning from Gold Cup duty. They're massive players on this team. Richie Larea is a designated player currently as slighted on the roster. That's more of a cap mechanism thing than him actually being a DP, but he is a DP right now, so he's taking up the one spot. Davy Flores has been critical for this team. He is a destroyer. Wins tackles, is physical in that midfield. You can notice his presence when he's not there. You look at his partner there, Alonso Cuello, a Spanish midfielder, came up through TFC2 into the senior team, has, had some really great games, and then has the tendency to still be a player that's still learning to be a full senior professional. Makes mistakes, but he had a great free kick against Portland the other weekend in the 3-0 win. On the left-hand side there at the wing, Tyrese Spicer, the former number 1 MLS draft pick from 2024. This is, again, a player that was kind of held back in terms of playing minutes because that's where Lorenzo Insigne would play. So now we're going to see the full sort of Tyrese Spicer experience. And TFC fans have warmed to him. He's a direct player. He's going to run at you. He's going to try to outpace you on that wing and put crosses in, and will take shots from there. Full Trinidad and Tobago international now. And somebody that TFC fans should be really excited. We talked about Theo earlier. Two other names I'll mention here. Just Ulla Brynhildsen as a number 9 on loan from Midtjylland right now. The jury's out on him. If they keep him, because there is an option to buy, he would be a designated player. Hasn't really, the effort's there. You can see he can hold the ball up, be strong on center backs, and bring the midfield into play. But he has not shown the scoring touch yet. Only has 1 goal. He's had a bunch of chances. It's not like chances haven't been created for him. He just has not hit the back of the net. And then you look at Maxime Dominguez, another player on loan from Vasco da Gama, has been impressive so far, sort of under the radar impressive. Again, a guy who came in and was a little bit of a victim of the Federico Bernardeschi, Lorenzo Insigne show, couldn't quite find a position that best suited him. He was actually playing as a holding midfielder at times, now playing in his more natural number 10 position, and is pulling a bit more of the strings. And lastly, Sean Johnson in goal, having almost pretty much a career year in goal, which you kind of applaud in one way, and then you kind of think about, oh, maybe that's not such a good thing because he's facing too many shots and making too many saves. But he has had a fantastic season. And frankly, the reason why we've probably won as many games as we have is simply he's saved us on numerous occasions this season. So that's the 11. That's approximately the shape. Again, it can form to a 4-3-3. Potential substitutions here is maybe they keep Lorachilore on the bench for another week and bring him in as a sub, as they did in New York midweek, and play Kosi Thompson as a right back. But basically, this is, and then in midfield, I guess they could put Matty Longstaff in there for either Flores or Quajo. But basically, this is your full strength starting 11 for TFC at this time, because the rest of the players on the bench are mostly either youth academy players, on loan players, or TFC2 call-ups.
And I just kind of wanted to spotlight Sean Johnson a bit. Obviously, he's a hometown hero here. Went to my high school, actually. Shout out Brookwood High School.
Awesome.
So yeah, him and Walker Zimmerman, by the way. So
awesome.
Georgia is a hotbed for soccer. Apparently, there's tons of soccer talent that comes out of here. So that's something that I definitely think we need to take more advantage of in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, Sean Johnson arrived in Toronto about 2 years ago. 2 years ago, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
How have y'all liked him so far?
He's been fantastic. Look, as a goalkeeper, considering what we had before, we had Alex Bono before, we had a sort of a roving duo. And look, you need stability in the number 1 position. You needed a guy who can come in and be a leader in the locker room. And Sean Johnson's that. Right now, he is now with Jonathan Osorio injured and both Lorenzo and Federico out of the team. He is now team captain. So, he, in a lot of ways, again, has saved Toronto FC numerous times in games, saved games from becoming embarrassing in some cases. So he's been a great guy. He's signed a contract extension with the team. He's going to be here till 26, I believe. So, this is a guy that Toronto FC fans have embraced as their goalkeeper, as sort of the co-captain along with Jonathan Osorio. And he's been fantastic for the club. He was a guy that everybody, when he became a free agent, everybody in Toronto, or at least Toronto FC fans, were like, we need to get this guy. And they pulled out the stops to get him, like they really did. And he is, and for the most part, he has been as billed, right? Which, again, when we've talked about the signings that we've talked about throughout this half an hour here, he's probably the one that's actually kind of been what he is on the tin, right? Like, solid shot stopper, good leader in the dressing room, a guy who can organize his back line. He's just been saddled with some bad center backs, to be honest, in the last couple of years.
Before we wrap things up, tell me a little bit about Toronto's strengths and weaknesses, right? In this game, where can they hurt Atlanta and where can Atlanta hurt them?
Yeah. So the biggest thing for Toronto FC in terms of hurting teams is definitely on the counter and down the wing. Either to Theo Corbianu, excuse me, or Tyrese Spicer, getting in behind your defense, and having either Maxim Dominguez or Ola Brynhildsen jump into the box and get those crosses. Right, that's where Toronto FC is dangerous on those counter-attacking moves. Alonso, look out for Alonso Cuejo's sort of passing. He's probably one of the most progressive uh, passers on the team in terms of somebody who's going to look to play forward. He will make a mistake from time to time trying to play those balls and get those intercepted, and you could be on a counterattack very easily. And that's probably. And then the other thing I'll say is if Richie Larea plays, Richie Larea down the right hand side is always a threat, whether he's using his pace to get by you or gets on the ball and tries to take a defender one-on-one. And when you get him in the box, don't bother trying to tackle him. He is a penalty drawing machine. So keep that in mind of the Canadian International. The way you beat Toronto FC, press. If you press this team, you press that back line. They're not the best with ball to feet. When you think about Sigurd Rosted and Kevin Long, I'll give some credit. I think Sigurd Rosted has gotten a lot better in the last couple of years since he came to Toronto FC. When he first got here, it was a bit of a disaster, but he's gotten a lot better over the last, I would say, over the last year. But this is a team that if you press them, they will make mistakes. They will turn the ball over, and you can get really great opportunities on this team. That has been the Achilles heel of the Toronto FC team. Not even just this specific team, but the last couple of years. They just have not handled teams that press them very well. Look at our record against the New York Red Bull, for example. So I think that's the way, if you're going to go about beating TFC, that's the way, is to press them, make mistakes. Even and look, Toronto FC is a little bit more front foot when they're at home. They tend to have a bit more possession when they're at home, but they will take risks. They will try things that are sometimes ill-advised. Put it that way. And again, that's when I was talking about earlier about the ability to get on the counter very quick, and that's something for all the ills you've talked about with Atlanta United, I know that's something you still can do very well. So that is one thing to consider when playing Toronto FC.
And Atlanta United, a team that really likes to employ more of a mid block, but I mean, they do have fast players, and I think the whole thing that we were sold on this offseason was, kill them with speed. And we haven't really seen that come to fruition this season, partly because service hasn't been great, also partly because Latte Lad has been wasteful up front at times. But certainly another chance for him to redeem himself and to finally break his scoring drought. We're just about wrapping up here. We'll get to very important part of the show, the score prediction. We have you all, the guests on this show, kind of go against us, the staff, a little bit in a contest, and y'all as a collective are fourth right now among 6 of our staff members. So there you go. You got to keep the streak going. How do you think this game ends?
I'm actually going to be hopeful for Toronto FC in this one. Usually I'm probably, of the 3 guys on the podcast, I'm probably the most pessimistic. But I will go for I will actually go for a 2-1 win for Toronto FC. Although they lost in New York on Wednesday, I do see, under sort of this new regime, if you want to call it that, is what people are calling it here in Toronto. It's not that new, but let's go with it. There is a little bit more cohesion there, and they'll maybe bundle their way into one goal, as they did on Wednesday. It was a kind of a sloppy goal given up by New York. And then they do have the ability, if they can find service. And I think, again, we're repeating each other because our clubs are so similar, I think, at the moment. If either Tyrese Spicer or Theo Corbianu could find service into Ola Brynhildsen or to Maxim Dominguez, I think they can find a way to score. They're much more attacking and just frankly a lot better offensively at home. And defensively, Toronto FC haven't been bad. I mean, considering when I say bad, you got to realize the bar is set really low. We've conceded over 60 goals the last 2 seasons. So right now we're not on pace to do that. So that is improvement, just from a statistical point of view. But, they have been a lot better defensively lately. But again, like I said, they're prone to individual errors from time to time on the ball, and that's what kills them. But I will be optimistic. I'll say a 2-1 TFC win.
All right. Well, if we see goals, honestly, I'll be happy from either side, because we were subjected to 90 minutes of a 0-0 Atlanta United DC draw last weekend. And honestly, the worst 90 minutes I've spent in my life.
Yeah, we've had a few of those. So I
painful to watch, man. But hey, if we get goals, at least from y'all, then it won't have been completely a waste. Mike, where can people find you and your work?
Yeah, so we do the Toronto Till I Die show. We do it as a live show on YouTube. So just type in Toronto Till I Die, and you can find all our past episodes there. Or Google us. We do the live show. It becomes a podcast, so you can follow us afterwards. We usually do a weekly show the last couple of weeks, just because of international break and some stuff personally amongst the guys. We haven't been on as much, but we're starting to get back onto the saddle. Weekly Mondays at 7 p.m. You can find us talking about TFC, the latest results, and sort of what's going on in the world, and all the fan banter, because we get a lot of it, from the week's results.
Well, that about wraps up this episode of Across the Pitch. Be sure to check out the website, scarvesandspikes.com, for all your news, opinions, and all types of articles about the Five Stripes, so you can stay up to date. Be sure to check out the shop so that you can get yourself some t-shirts, some hats, some beer glasses, tons of cool stuff that you can purchase to support the show. And another way you can support the show, by joining the Patreon. $1.17 a month gets you access to exclusive interview audio series like our Unfiltered series and our Patreon mailbag, and of course access to our Discord, where we have an awesome community and would love to have y'all there. And Mike, thanks for coming on, man. Everyone, thank you for watching.
Cheers.